Han Kong-chi always wanted to be number one, whether it was in studies, sports, or video games, but nothing good ever came out of it. He had heard that everyone had a natural talent, though he didn't know why his own had never been discovered. He wondered more than once if there was a job in which he could be better at something than others. One day on his way home from school, Kong-chi came across two healthy men who obviously spared no expense on Botox. They offered to let the kid know the truth if he had the money to pay for the expensive enlightenment. Khan made it clear that his pockets were empty, which sparked a heated argument between the crooks. Discounting the truth, they began to work out exactly who would get their share, which the young man took advantage of. The men obviously did not like the fact that this impudent man decided to get away by talking their teeth, and therefore turned to forceful methods, began to slap Kong-chi one after another, demanding to give all the money that he has with him. Wanting to stop this outrage, the young man involuntarily swung his arm, but, surprisingly, the blow was so strong that the unconscious body of the fat man flew a couple of meters before falling down, breaking the asphalt. The same fate befell the second rogue. Kong-chi didn't fully understand whether it was chance or fate, but that day, his hidden talent had finally awakened. He had no doubt that he could now become number one with such incredible strength. Yet the fellow to whom the story was told was puzzled as to what the use of ordinary physical strength was, that is, what heights could be achieved by simply swinging his fists. In order to find the answer, the bespectacled man looked into the book, and it soon revealed two paths for a Korean high school student where such talent could help. The first is to become a first-class athlete and bring glory to the country, but this will require a lot of capital, at least to hire a good coach. The second option is a career as a military officer, police officer, or even a firefighter. Become a guarantor of security and justice, get a government position and a stable future. But it is worth taking into account the huge competition and an excellent certificate. Given that his parents are not businessmen and his school performance leaves much to be desired, his friend advised him to give up. After all, Kong-chi is not the only one with talent. Suddenly, another option caught his attention. This business doesn't require good grades or rich relatives, just brute physical strength. Meanwhile, the gang members were meeting their boss Kwak Du-shik. The latter looked at the youngster with a slightly perplexed look on his face, but the assistant explained that he dared to accept him into the gang because he intended to become number one in the gangster world. In that case, the big guy decided to reveal some details about the job. They brew and sell something from the lab, as well as cut something from their enemies, after which they shove that something somewhere. Outside, a couple of police officers were watching the situation, already preparing to storm the shelter. The captain wanted to get the rampaging leader of the group at any cost. Finally, overcoming their own fear, they rushed into the room, holding their pistols in front of them. However, there was no need to use weapons, because all the participants of the secret meeting were already lying on the ground in a heap with obvious signs of beating. Kong-chi announced his return on a bench in the local park, and the next second a beggarly, handsome Han Du-jin, who is also the boy's father, emerged from the bushes. After giving him a good look at his body, the man asked him to tell him what was causing the sadness on his son's face, and he admitted that he wanted to go to the academy. "I don't look like someone who can do that," Jin laughed. Indeed, he had neither money nor connections. Suddenly his attention turned to the two beauties, who immediately received his compliments. Unable to withstand the pressure of Jin's charisma, the girls involuntarily reached into his pocket for money, and in a few moments the scoundrel was already counting the money. Finally, he turned back to his son, reminding him of his dream to be the best at something and noting that studying was clearly not his thing. Kong-chi remarked that talent alone wasn't enough for that, but the man argued with that statement. Of course, he didn't deny that other qualities were also important, but talent was an incredibly rare gift from fate. After all, he himself lives like a king among beggars only because of his dazzling beauty. Suddenly Jin ducked back into the bushes as two gentlemen appeared ahead of him, eager to see how well the bat would look in the face of the beggar who had screwed them by taking their money. Lastly, he handed his son a flyer, explaining that it was also a gift of sorts. Jin said that this was a great opportunity to channel talent, and the people from this organization helped make it happen. After reading the text, Kong-chi realized that he had finally found what he had been looking for so long. Right now, the hero department was looking for newcomers with no experience or education to join their team. And the main criterion for selection was brute physical strength. Soon, Kong-chi was already standing in front of the building indicated on the map, but besides him, another newcomer had also come here according to the announcement. The latter didn't understand how such a serious organization could be located in such a crowded place, but there could be no mistake. In any case, he decided to go inside to begin with, and was soon riding up the elevator surrounded by an exorbitantly noisy crowd. And Dae-yeon immediately realized he was in one of the cheapest neighborhoods, though there was nothing to be surprised about considering how low the company's requirements were. His parents had long reproached him for never finding a job in his 30s. He didn't know what the hero department was, but he just couldn't help but go for an interview at the only company that accepted his paperwork. After making sure the room was empty, Dae-yeon decided to deal with the irritation in his nose, but it was at that moment that a rather pretty girl walked by who was clearly not in the mood. The young man looked behind her into the corridor, where Kim Ta-and, the person in charge of office work, found him. The pretty girl with the elf ears was interested in the guest, but she seemed to be just as surprised, because Eun was the only one who responded to the invitation for the first time in 12 years. But that wasn't the end of the good news. Just today, 2 applicants came to them at once, and So Yen's dreams of automatic employment were shattered. He was asked to wait next to the second candidate, and after an awkward pause, Kang-chi decided to get acquainted. The young man didn't seem so bad to Dae-yeon, and soon they were invited to the long-awaited interview. The young man's expectations didn't come true this time either. Contrary to what was promised in the flyer, Ta-and asked in great detail about his school years, part-time jobs, and even his driver's license. After listening to the first candidate's awkward answers, the girl decided to move on to the second, but the interviewer with the scary tattoo near her found the questions too boring. He was eager to get to the point, so he directly asked if they had the power, and after hearing Kang-chi's strong affirmative answer, he happily announced that he had been accepted. Finished with business, Hwa-ran headed for the exit, but his partner ran out after him, trying to explain that it's simply not possible to conduct the selection in such a manner. Sure, the man had his own vision, but the headquarters simply wouldn't approve of such a procedure, and the man couldn't help but agree. In that case, Hwa-ran held out her pass, asking her to send these 2 to Yellow. He explained that these 2 had already been accepted and were heroes. If they could handle the trials, it would convince the headquarters, but such a suggestion clearly didn't please Ta-and. Of course, she was used to her comrades' antics, but every joke should have a limit. After all, these 2 might die in the end, but Hwa-ran was adamant. Soon the candidates were informed of their acceptance to the hero positions, and immediately their first assignment. It all seemed strange to Dae-eun from the beginning. Well, this madman asking just 2 questions finally convinced him. Now Dae-yeon had no doubt that they were in an illegal gangster group. He was about to call it quits, but the official contract, the good salary and the promised rewards made him stay. They were then led to a warehouse where they were given a pair of work slaves called transformation clothes. By the way, Kang-chi didn't even have enough belt, so he had to make do with suspenders. After that, the guys were given laser guns that looked more like children's toys, asking them not to use them in public. Suddenly a staff member remembered that these weapons would require batteries, which could be purchased at the store on the first floor, and soon the newfound heroes were ready for their first mission. They received a message on their phone from their superiors with an admonition, as well as a link to the target, which was a very popular blogger. Dae-yeon couldn't believe that they needed to exterminate a mere YouTuber, but even more worrying was the distance to their destination, an hour-and-a-half walk. The lack of money didn't stop them from enjoying the cab ride. Looking at his suit, Dae-yeon was ready to tear up at the realization of what kind of shit he was doing at his age. However, he asked his partner not to look down on a loser in his 30s who was driving around the city in a childish Power Ranger outfit, even though he had no intention of doing so. Kang-chi admitted that he hadn't accomplished much himself, but he still had hopes of becoming the best at anything. Such dreams made Dae-yeon question his partner's adequacy. At the first meeting, Kang-chi seemed like a normal boy, but with each passing minute he resembled a capricious child. In any case, they soon reached the place, deciding to keep together and help each other since there was work to be done together. Apparently, there was some kind of fair going on in the park at that moment, so Dae-yeon had no idea how to look for the right YouTuber among such a mass of people. Suddenly, his attention was caught by the crowd, saying the name of their favorite chip, and in the middle of them, a man in a pink teddy bear costume jumped on the stage. Then the autograph session began, which resulted in a one-on-one meet and greet between the guys and the target. At first, Chip mistook them for festival workers, but upon hearing that they were heroes, he admitted that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. After getting the producer's permission to go, Chip led the heroes to a secret location to hand over items needed by each trainee. He admitted that he was helping all the heroes, because they were so great. Soon, they came to the trash cans where the bear had hidden the items, but only stinky black bags were inside. Suddenly, Dae-yeon jumped up from a powerful kick, and Kang-chi found himself pinned against the wall by a powerful paw. Baring his sharp teeth, Chip admitted that it wasn't easy for him to restrain himself surrounded by such a crowd of people. The young man immediately reached for his gun, but the bear knocked the weapon out of his hands with a sharp movement. First, he decided to taste the hero and without any delay bit off his hand. Unable to cope with the pain, Kang-chi simply passed out, but the next moment he kicked the bear in the stomach with all his might. Although this confused Chip somewhat, he responded by attacking the unfortunate schoolboy himself, smashing his body through the wall opposite. Of course, the villain was going to play for a long time, but now the plans had changed, and so he pounced on the victim, wanting to swallow him whole. His teeth were about to close, when suddenly another hero appeared between the predator and the victim. Because of the device in the stranger's hands, Chip lost the ability to move, but still found the strength to jump back. When the villain asked him who was in front of him, the man introduced himself as the captain of the hero's first squad, Yen Poon, nicknamed Wind Elf. Chip had no doubt that he was not an ordinary man, but this hero is strikingly different from those kids. In an attempt to get out of the predicament, the bear recalled the peace treaty with mankind, although he himself broke it. These words seemed to the hero an incredible impudence, although he would have killed the villain anyway for what he had done to the trainees. The next second the bear jumped on the roof and started to run, realizing that otherwise he would definitely become a corpse. But after a few meters he came face to face with the hero again, and soon he was begging for forgiveness. Chip promised to surrender, explaining, justifying that those two first attacked him, and he was just defending himself, but Yen Pun repeated that he would be killed anyway. The next moment the hero began to wave his device in different directions, plunging the villain into the very vortex of the powerful vortex. He tried to hold on as best he could, but his real appearance gradually began to come out, and soon there was no trace left of the cute teddy bear. Chip couldn't admit that he had met a worthy opponent, but he still offered to surrender, confident that no one could defeat him in this form of a yellow danger level monster. Suddenly, he felt something strange in his side, the exact spot where Kang-chi's kick had landed. In any case, he decided to ignore it, and since his true nature had been revealed, no one would be able to leave this place alive. It opened its jaws wide, intending to devour the hero, but in the next second, first its jaw and then its entire body was chopped into many small pieces, and the wind elf headed towards the injured trainee with the same cold-blooded look. Ta and I reported that the condition was still unstable, though the worst was over, and right now, the cells of the right arm were being regenerated. Casting a glance at Kang-chi, the hero couldn't understand what had happened. He looked completely normal until the moment his arm was bitten off. Yen Pun asked if there were any more craft around, and the assistant reported a half-monster that had changed shape about 5 hours ago. Its danger level was green, so the master didn't have to deal with such a case, but Pun still asked not to pass the information to another department. Picking up Kang-chi, the man warned that he himself was moving out to the location to see if there was anything special about this newcomer. A strange voice sounded in Kang-chi's ears, urging him to wake up. Barely opening his eyes, he found a humanoid lizard in front of him, who was clearly happy to see Mr. Hero awaken. Pointing to the bloody bodies behind him, the monster confessed that it had simply wanted to kill the company employees who had bullied him, but the feeling of power and authority had disrupted the plans, so a little more people had died. Still, it wasn't enough, and so he wished to test his powers on someone like a hero. It's so ridiculous that the latter is now just sprawled out here sleeping. And the inscription on his stomach threatening to exterminate all monsters made the monster mad, so he tried to attack him. After dodging the first attack, the young man took a moment to think. He was confused, as he clearly remembered the distraught Chip, who had torn off his arm before he passed out. Meanwhile, the lizard continued to press on, and with each successive evasion it seemed to him that this hero was somewhat weak. Grabbing the young man by the head, the monster pressed him into the ground with force, and then began unleashing powerful blows one after another, furious that some dead man had been sent after him. Suddenly he stopped. What if he's not too weak, but I'm too damn strong? The monster thought as the figure of Yen Poon suddenly appeared in front of him. For a second, the man thought that the previous incident with Chip was a mere coincidence, but the next moment, Kang-chi was back on his feet. The lizard was quite surprised that the guy had survived his blow, but now decided to finally end the matter. Gathering all the power in his fist, the monster brought it down on his opponent's head, but he continued to stand firmly in place as if he didn't feel anything. Suddenly, Kang-chi raised his head, his crazed gaze staring literally into his opponent's soul. In the next moment, he retaliated with a blow so powerful that it made a hole in the monster's side, causing it to fall to the ground dead. Looking at the exhausted newcomer with a glance, Yen Pun grinned. "It's been a long time since we've had such curious guys," he said with a happy and somewhat mad expression on his face. Meanwhile, a man with a cold goat-like expression reminded him that in this place called Utopia, everyone was a partner who shared the same dream. Everyone here is always sure of each other, but the latest incident with Chip's murder had raised some doubts in the superior's minds. It was for this reason that he wondered if this was also part of the plan. In response, the girl asked if he had ever tried cooking freshly cut meat. Despite its tempting color, the shrunken muscles and lactic acid would make it taste truly disgusting. Even the best cooks can't solve this problem, so you can only enjoy the dish after a while until the microorganisms and enzymes break down the hardness of the meat. Opening her sharp teeth to swallow a bite, she advised her superiors to just wait. Suddenly a second assistant ran up to them, shouting trouble. He showed the foreman a tablet on which the news was blaring about the tragic death of Chip, a national favorite. The pink plush remains scattered in one of the alleyways made it clear that he had been the victim of a brutal murder by those who had failed to adapt to the era of peace that had come more than a dozen years ago. Suddenly, N-Pun slapped the wall right above Tani's head with force, accusing the assistant of being unable to handle even the basic job of covering up the aftermath. In fact, the master couldn't understand why he would even bother about it. After all, it wasn't his fault that negligent employees had allowed the leak to happen. But Waran, who had inexplicably appeared from nowhere, made it clear that the responsibility for his subordinates rested on the leader's shoulders. The relationship between the two nutcases was already bad enough, and this accusation added even more fuel to the fire. The heroes were about to clash when they were interrupted by Director Yul's booming voice. He didn't understand why these two were acting like this despite what had happened. The director had noticed that the monster leader had already reached its final stage, but the plush remains were a rejected piece that simply couldn't be. Besides, he completely trusted Ta-Ni, who was heard to be one of the most experienced experts in the company's entire existence. He believed that she simply couldn't have made such a ridiculous mistake. In any case, the hype raised by the news would be handled by the headquarters, and the government members would continue to remain silent after making a few loud statements. Still, the director well understood the urgency of the situation, because the primary task is to maintain an era of peace, so he expressed his willingness to take responsibility for the fate of the heroes. Eun-Pung didn't object, except that he was just sure that this wasn't the main reason why the director had decided to come here. "You can't be fooled," Yul laughed and admitted that the reason for the visit was the news of a promising trainee. A rookie who had stood up to a yellow-level monster could not go unnoticed, and that was why the headmaster was here. Still, the man remarked that you can't recruit people without an exam, ignoring the headquarters' instructions. Waran promised to send a newcomer immediately, and Eun-Pung didn't object either. In that case, Zhang Yul asked to escort him, which somewhat confused the Wind Elf. He asked for someone else to be entrusted with the task, in response to which the headmaster reminded him of the unique tradition of heroes that a master should assist the trainee of his branch. This is an opportunity to show that the master has personally selected and mentored the newcomer on the right path to fight evil. With the other three branches adhering to this rule, Eun-Pun would have to follow suit. Soon the master was already sitting behind the wheel of the car, promising to kill everyone who was in the hospital. By the way, he was also unhappy that the trainee didn't have a license, and upon hearing the objections that a high school student simply couldn't drive a car, he asked him to just shut up. Anyway, he explained that the upcoming test was a small thing. Just a little test to show if the trainee is capable of becoming a hero in a couple days. "If you come back, I'll definitely make sure you have a sweet job," the mentor warned with his characteristic crazy look. His father, to whom Kong Chi had also decided to inform about the upcoming 3-day trip, was delighted that the young man was able to carve out a place for himself in this terribly competitive world called the labor market. Although he was worried about his son, who would not be able to enjoy his parents' beautiful smile for a few days, he did not discourage him. Before leaving for the place, the young man asked to stop at one more place. As he pulled up in front of Dae-Yun's house, who no longer remembered his former partner, Kong Chi thanked the cab driver for paying, returning the favor. As he darted between cars on the busy highway, the trainee remembered one more thing and thanked Yen-Poon for saving him from the monster's clutches, though the mentor only asked him to shut up again. When they arrived at the restricted floor, the director of the healer department, Lee Suk, was already waiting for them. He noticed that the last time Eun-Pun had been here was about 12 years ago, although after greeting him, it was clear that his character was still as unpleasant as before. In any case, the principal was curious to take a look at the first trainee that Eun-Pun had brought. He was surprised that a high school student had decided to join them, so he asked what made Kong Chi become a hero. The one announced his goal to reach the top without a second thought. The guy's ambition impressed, though it didn't surprise the headmaster, so he asked to escort him to the examination room. The master was about to leave when suddenly Lee Suk offered to drink a cup of English tea, which had been insisted on for a whole 99 years. Poon's refusal also didn't surprise his interlocutor, and so he informed him that he had brought this drink as well. The presence of the yellow pipe convinced the master to stay, so they were soon enjoying their drinks in a more private place. Suk noticed that this was their first meeting since the Age of Peace, so he asked how he was getting along with Hwa-ran. "If you say that name again, I'll kill you," Eun-pun said coldly, realizing that he hadn't changed his attitude toward people in 12 years. By the way, he also asked what attracted Suk so much to this useless playground created by the cunning of his superiors and the association of humanity that he had been here for almost 10 years. Lee Suk advised him to watch his words, as there are very strict rules and regulations. However, he admitted that he was not surprised that the first branch trainee had come, but rather that Eun-pung had personally brought him here. He argued that he didn't want to come here, he'd been tricked by that nasty old man he'd only dreamed of killing, but Lee Suk saw something more to it than that. He assumed that this newcomer interested Eun-pung, and the latter didn't deny that this trainee was intriguing. Not wanting to show all of his emotions, the master launched the emptied bottle at his interlocutor before heading towards the exit. Eun-pung stretched wide, looking forward to going back to watching the show, but the trainee came out as well. Kong Chi announced that he was disqualified, ordering him to go home, which literally dumbfounded the mentor. He didn't understand how one could get disqualified for a basic test, but the examiner explained that that was the problem. The guy just didn't have a base. Once in front of his colleagues, Yen-pun asked his mentee to multiply 8 by 3, which caused the latter to have difficulty. He even asked for permission to use a notebook, for which he incurred the resentment of the master. Principal Yul was also surprised. It seems like Kong Chi doesn't even have a basic understanding of school knowledge. Eun-pung made a hole in the wall of the company to blow off steam and went straight to Hwa-ran's office, where the shouting was immediately heard. Over a cup of coffee, Ta and I assured the director that Poon had cooled down and was on his way home. The man suggested that it's not easy to work with such reckless colleagues, although Ni herself would give them a different characterization. Either way, the intern seems like a pretty intriguing guy. Given his determined attitude, it's no wonder why Hwa-ran was so quick to hire him. Except there was one more thing that seemed odd to the director. Chip had a yellow danger level, so there was no way 2 trainees could be approved for the operation to catch him, and the girl admitted that this was her slip. The monster's appearance seemed quite cute, so she figured the newbies would be able to handle it. Still, Ta and I noticed that the monsters never attacked head-on. All this time, they had used a quiet approach, but this time was different. The principal explained that such a change in approach must have a good reason. Something told him that a chilling breeze was approaching. Meanwhile, the very school friend Kong Chi, who had helped with choosing a direction to invest his talent in, was horrified to read the article about Chip's murder. He didn't understand where the country was going, because now people would do anything to get what they wanted from those they considered to be villains. The roommate rightly pointed out that this should not concern some schoolboy, and then he decided to have a snack. Going out into the hallway, he loudly ordered the pig with muscles to order chicken, but there was no response. The addressee of this message was also watching the news closely at this moment. If Chip's murder was true, he suggested that it was time to take up the case himself. Dae-yun lay on the couch, watching the screen with interest. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, but when he saw the mom contact, he just flipped the device over and continued watching. Suddenly, his sister, who had seen everything that had happened, burst into the room. She shouted that since this bum sits on his parents' neck all day long, he should at least have the conscience to answer the phone. In general, the girl was perplexed why she had to put up with all these people who complain about the negligent brother, and therefore warned that if he ignored another call, turn into a chop. After hearing all the complaints against him, Dae-yun decided to rummage through the shelves for something to eat, and soon prepared to continue watching, armed with a packet of chips. He was about to reach his target when he was suddenly knocked down by a powerful kick from his sister, who was furious that her brother had entered her room without permission. The girl had the flyers with the ad in her hands, and Eun didn't deny that he just wanted to find a job. Ji-yu hoped that her brother hadn't gone to apply for a job at a company with such suspiciously low selection criteria, and he assured her that he wasn't that desperate. In any case, the girl ordered the house to be cleaned up before she returned, and when asked for $10 for a snack, simply slammed the door shut. A few seconds later, a notification did arrive on the guy's phone crediting him with a few bucks, but now his attention was on the brightly colored flyer with the ad, wondering if it was worth it. Jiyu herself didn't understand at all why these ads were sent to their house. She didn't want to mess with the first branch that didn't even have interns, and so she decided to express to them that she wasn't going to distribute the pieces of paper. The endless requests to press different numbers in order to choose a service option made the girl very angry, and the notification that the data was incorrect made her throw the device to the ground. Still, she wasn't going to put up with it, deciding to go there in person. Meanwhile, Dae-yeon was enjoying his noodles at one of the local cafes. The hero's company refused his interview, so he decided to go home as soon as possible, because the program would start soon. Suddenly he bumped into some mountain of muscles. The collision was so strong that the guy even fell down, for which the big guy apologized several times. Picking up the hat that had fallen off his head, Dae-yeon thought for a moment. He couldn't remember the weirdo who'd returned the money for the cab helping him find the missing item, but he decided not to make a big deal of it. In any case, the jock had nothing to show for it, since he made it clear that he hadn't knocked the guy down on purpose, so Dae-yeon just went home. Soon enough, night fell. Dae-yeon had a great time the whole time, although it was a little strange that his sister never came back. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and the young man realized that you seemed to be drunk again. He knew that her behavior changes drastically after a few drinks, so he hurriedly opened the door, but there was no one on the doorstep. Assuming it was just a prank, he went back inside and immediately reached for the chips, but the packet was empty for some reason. Then the power went out. He decided to call his sister to ask if she would be back soon, not realizing that there was someone else in the house. Dae-yeon turned his head and was startled to see the same jock he'd encountered at the cafe. "Let's play a little game," the intruder suggested with a mad look, and then pounced on him. Meanwhile, his Jiyu had not abandoned her attempts to deal with the first branch and was already standing in front of their office, though her fuse had diminished. In fact, she didn't feel comfortable in the dark alley. She had only come here because she was angry, but now she had regained her composure and the broken windows suggested that something was wrong here. Sure, she was sure the masters of the first branch wouldn't be angry enough to harm a trainee from the fourth, but rumors of violent madman Eun-poon and Hwa-ran certainly didn't guarantee that. With no one answering the phone, the girl made the decision to return home, because after all, the future fate of the heroes depended on these announcements. She was about to leave when suddenly, Kong-chi came out of the building. You didn't understand who he was, and why the lights were on everywhere but the first branch, but she didn't ask about it directly. As a gift to the newcomer, Ta and I gave him a textbook with the elementary basics of arithmetic. And, of course, the young man assumed that becoming a hero would not be easy, but he felt that he was already one step away from it. Suddenly, his musings were interrupted by Dae-yeon, who greetingly recognized his former partner. He confessed that he remembered everything, so he was waiting for Kong-chi here. The latter didn't even realize that he was holding a huge kitchen knife behind his back and his every move was controlled by the monster behind the trash can. The big guy held back his joy with all his might, as he had always dreamed of doing something like that. By the way, he found people even more amusing now. As expected, Kong-chi recognizes his former partner and even considers him a good person. Dae-yeon is really sorry to kill the schoolboy, but he just has no choice, as the lives of his family are at stake. Suddenly, he pulled out a knife, preparing to strike, but at the same second, the heroine made the monster fly out of its hiding place. She threw another blow, and the big guy noticed that the girl was much braver than her brother. He asked to listen, but you was unwilling to talk to the bastard who was using a talentless bum to bully. All of her opponent's words passed his ears, and with her next move, the heroine threw him backwards, leaving a noticeable scar on his face. The monster began to doubt that he was fighting a human. The movements, agility, and ferocity of her opponent made her look more like a rabid dog, but that was even more interesting. Leaping over the monster, you tried to pierce its neck with her fangs, but several rows of razor-sharp teeth emerged from beneath the big man's clothes and sank into the girl's arm. "Don't overwork yourself, dearie. It all starts now," growled the monster, taking its final big Judy stage of yellow danger level. Dae-yeon didn't understand what the hell was going on here. First it turns out that her sister is a hero, and then this psycho turns into some kind of freak. By the way, he looked even more intimidating now, but Dae-yeon tried to regain his composure. He couldn't just stand still while his sister would be torn apart on the spot, and so he decided to do something about it himself. You couldn't understand what the first branch was doing if it let yellow-level monsters just wander around. The thought of what kind of opponent she would be fighting was frightening and exhilarating at the same time. Due to the rules of the headquarters, such a chance is not often given, and therefore, there was no way to miss it. In the next second, you rushed forward. She was sure that the big guy would not be able to keep up with her at this speed, and soon she was close to his neck again. However, the monster didn't need to chase her. Just before the collision, its back opened again, revealing rows of teeth that immediately gnawed on the heroine's arm. Thus you met Judy, who protects her master, allowing her to give herself fully to her favorite pastime, eating. After several attacks, you finally realized that any of her swift attacks had no effect on the monster. It seems this is what is called absolute defense in the world of heroes. In such a case, she had to resort to what the girl had been saving until last. Now she gathered all her strength and prepared to give it her best, as Dae-yeon suddenly shouted that he had fulfilled the condition. Turning around, you found her brother with a bloody knife in his hands and a schoolboy lying at his feet. Not wanting to waste time explaining, the boy grabbed his sister and dragged her behind him. Picking up the moment, Ji-yu stopped abruptly, dropping her brother to the ground. She wondered how he could believe the monster's words and condemn a man to certain death. Of course, she realized that N was desperate, thinking he was a loser who couldn't even find a job, but she advised him to never give up on being human. Suddenly, the big man appeared behind her back and shoved her aside with force. Her brother's naivete made even him laugh, but there would be a price to pay for the spoiled fun. Yen immediately ran away, but before he could run a few meters, he was knocked down by a mailbox. Judy laughed that such jerks who blame society for all their failures have one thing in common: they're very gullible. The monster noticed that the guy stabbed Kong Chi of his own free will and distracted his sister with his own stupidity. It is for this reason that such a sad ending is entirely his fault. Suddenly, Kong Chi slipped out of Judy's clutches, leaving his famous mark on his side. He promised to show the scum his place, but the young man said he didn't think he was scum. "I'm a hero," he shouted, and with these words he rushed to the attack, but was met with a counter-strike. Principal Yul had noticed that there were a lot of people in the world who could handle a yellow-level monster, so the trainees' dreams of becoming stronger than them seemed absurd. However, he didn't intend to become number one through strength alone. He believed that only someone who could endure, a fighter of incredible resilience, could become number one. This was the chance that Kong Chi was waiting for. Facing the true end, true strength and character are put to the test. Yet, the young man didn't understand the fear in the monster's eyes. He struck it again and again. Jude still had no way of understanding why he was afraid of someone weaker than him, but the answer soon came by itself. He assumed that this guy would be a huge source of trouble for other villains in the future, so he decided to tear him apart before it was too late. In an attempt to overpower the monster, Kong Chi began to not only punch it, but also bite it. However, during the decisive strike, he was once again hit by a counter-attack, and then was pinned to the ground by a powerful blow. "Remember this power well," Judy urged, but suddenly his jaw was shaken by Ji-yu's leg. In response, the monster threw her to the ground, although he was surprised that she still had some strength left. Suddenly, De-yong appeared behind his back, shouting to stop. In his hands was the shard he was about to pierce the monster with, but in the next second, both of his hands snapped out of the way. Judy wondered if this Morel really thought he could do something with his courage. But it was useless, for he'd been a loser all his life who denied reality. Now that he knelt down, this posture was perfect for such a jerk. However, the monster asked not to be upset, promising that his death, like Ji-yu's, would be quick. When her brother's head was between the monster's teeth, the heroine was back in the fight, gathering her last strength in her fist, but Dae-yeon wasn't going to give up so easily. At least now, for the last time, he wanted to get rid of the title of a 30-year-old loser, so he ordered his sister to grab the monster's left arm. At this moment, Song-chi also jumped out of the monster's clutches. With a deft movement, he moved backwards, and when Ji-yu forced the monster to open up, he delivered a decisive blow to the side. Dae-yeon's life force was running low, so the Elphus ordered another 500 milligrams of adrenaline to be injected. Because she had revitalized his cells 2 days ago, their regeneration rate had slowed down considerably. For some reason, there was a deep stab wound on his palm. Because of this, most of his cells had already died. Suddenly, Dae-yeon opened his eyes. Due to Judy's jaws attacking enemies on their own, the guy took advantage of this and lunged at him like bait, causing his side to be damaged. In fact, this was the worst strategy that Dae-pun had seen in his career, but he still wished the newcomer to survive. The master's smile kept Dae-yeon's face down, and he couldn't hold back his tears. Meanwhile, the wounded monster was trying its last strength to escape while that black-haired youngster lay unconscious. He really didn't want to die, but Yen Poon's appearance disrupted all plans. Suddenly, the monster pulled out a detonator. "Did you really think that I wouldn't have a trump card up my sleeve?" laughed the monster. He warned that he had planted a bomb in that brick building, so he advised me to hurry up and save the family. The monster started counting down, but at the 3rd second, the building blew itself apart. Judy was both angry and surprised that the hero had blown up those poor people himself, but in response, he only used his device to chop the monster into pieces. In response to his pleas to stop, Eun-pun countered that he couldn't just get away with killing innocents, and therefore it was time to get rid of the trash. Ta and I inquired about the master's well-being, but he only wanted to hear that all the residents of that building had evacuated. The girl also reported the stabilization of the injured. Still, this was the first time the yellow danger level had been discovered so late. Further delay would cost much more, but the question remained as to why the rank card hadn't activated. Yen-pun suggested that it wasn't entirely that. In his opinion, someone could have pretended that the card was inactive. Suddenly, Waran appeared behind their backs. This situation clearly required his presence, but the words spoken by his colleague hurt him a little. He hoped that Eun-pun did not suspect him, but he said that he was sure of his comrade because they were a team. The next day, Yen-pun showed the director a photo found at the investigation site. He also said that there was a yellow at the scene yesterday. The director didn't understand why the skill system couldn't detect an uncontrollable monster beforehand, but one thing was certain, it was very bad. Besides, there was a chance that this was not an exception, but just the beginning. These guys clearly weren't going to make any rash moves, especially since the media was playing in their chief's favor. The director agreed that this was the first time something like this was happening since the peace era, but he still didn't understand why Eun-pun wanted to investigate secretly. The master asked him to turn the photo, on the back of which the Utopia symbol was visible. Poon explained that Utopia was a small company 3 years ago, but now it was number 2 in the market. Their growth began after the Humanity Association decided to invest in the organization. But what was even stranger was that the association had also invested in heroes. Eun-pun could so smell the scent of bullshit in this case, and the director assured that he would keep it all a secret. He also promised to do everything he could to help with the investigation. Yong-poon asked him to try harder, and then Yul asked what the first branch master himself would be doing all this time. After saying that, a trainee appeared on the roof, and Poon noticed that the kid's recovery speed was amazing. That was why he wanted to send him to the hero camp. The man didn't understand if Poon was really going to send an intern who was working for the 3rd day to a camp that was opening in a month. It's too reckless even for such a lunatic, but the master promised that he would personally train the youngster the entire time. Since he can't handle the base, he needs to prove himself worthy of the title of hero in a roundabout way. By the way, Kang-chi himself didn't seem to have the right idea of what camp he was talking about. Everything has a grade. The same goes for heroes. Your value depends on your score, and the range is huge. The color of the cards that determine the tasks are assigned depending on the grade. Master, official employee, and trainee are the 3 levels of clearance in the company of heroes. Masters are members of the Octagon, the strongest heroes. There is truly a huge gulf between this and the other classes. A month ago, the trainee of the 2nd branch, Suk-jin, couldn't wait for the car to reach this cursed village. Seeing that his partner was asleep, the big man slapped him in the face to control himself. Every year, the branches select 2 trainees. They have to go to an evaluation camp where they will take tests to become employees. The name of this place is Level Up Camp. Kang-chi and his mentor were already in the car, and he was not happy again. The camp task force leader was eager to find out who would be the worker this time. The aide suggested that HQ would make up for the lack of participants this year with the T-17 model, and the trainees from the 1st branch were still on their way. Yian didn't understand how anyone could be 20 minutes late, but the aide explained that the master was out of touch. The supervisor was perplexed as to why those bastards from the 1st branch even decided to join them, even though they still can't pull themselves together. The assistant suggested that perhaps they should reschedule, but objected that she would not tolerate such disregard for the rules. If they weren't there in 5 minutes, the 1st branch would be automatically disqualified. Looking at the other campers, Suk-jin wondered if this was really the heroes' assessment headquarters. The 4th branch is all women, and the 3rd branch looks like it just came out of a sect. In his opinion, there are more interesting competitors in the children's sandbox. Ji-yu asked the fat man to shut up, but he explained that he just thought she was so damn cute. The girl was ready to knock the annoying boar's teeth out for such insolence, but her partner reminded her that fighting in the camp was punishable by immediate disqualification. She was sure that the opportunity to kill this asshole would present itself, she just had to wait. Suddenly, the big guy switched to his partner, who had stopped giving massages for some reason. He excused himself that he just didn't want to interrupt his comrade. Suddenly, Suk-jin put his arm around him, explaining that it was just a joke. He noticed that there should be no fear between the partners, so he asked him to just stand behind him. The fatty was sure that no one in this camp could stop him, so the only one to worry about was that guy from the first branch, even though his seat was currently empty. The first and second gates are considered the strongest of the 8 marks and are protected by the masters of the first branch. Since their founding, they have refrained from participating in the competition. The reason is unknown, but rumors say that they do not accept trainees weaker than themselves. This means that the guy from the first branch is an incredibly talented person. In this place, he was the only one the fatty really wanted to look at. Finally, the door opened and everyone froze in anticipation of the intern. A big man who surpassed even the most daring fantasies of the other participants appeared on the threshold, but he turned out to be just an attendant. The bulky man asked Kong Chi to take his seat, and the others all looked at the puny newcomer with interest. Well, if you want to see the next installment, let's give this video 1000 likes and also write a secret word in the comments. Skill. That way I'll know you've seen this video to the end. See you later and bye-bye.